I think a materialist approach to things is very, very consistent with my experience in Christian social justice.
I feel like the deeper I get into anarchist practice, the deeper my faith is getting at the same time.
I would hope that, securing means of life for all would be something all people of faith would say, oh yes, that's at the basis of what we believe.
Those who are most marginalized know the most about the true, the good, and the beautiful.
To me, it's less that I think building class solidarity is a bad thing, as much as it seems like if you don't attend to things like anti-Black racism, that's always going to get in the way of building class solidarity, actually.
And when you go back, you find that a lot of revolutionary grassroots participatory movements, the precursors to what you could call the barrio assemblies and these grassroots neighborhood organizations, a lot of these were sponsored by the church.
What does it mean to say that the Christian tradition is internally contradictory and there are antagonisms there and you're always being faithful to some aspects and betraying other aspects?
Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm Dean Detloff, a PhD student at the Institute for Christian Studies in Toronto.
I'm Matt Bernico. I teach media studies at Greenville University in Greenville, Illinois.
This week, I am also in Greenville, Illinois, because it's Matt's birthday, and I was a big surprise.
Yeah, didn't even see it coming. Dean just walked into my backyard on Friday night, and I was surprised.
Spooked ya.
Real spooked.
Yeah, so I've been hanging out here. It's been a good time. I don't know, didn't get up to too many crazy things, but we did go to a communist-themed bar last night. That was pretty good.
It was surprisingly good. It was great. They had lots of Soviet posters.
That's right. They had some good Soviet-themed drinks, but also a drink named after the Tsar. That's a bit weird.
It was grapefruit, though. It was pretty good.
Yeah, well, grapefruit Tsar.
Grapefruit Tsar.
Yeah, it was good, though. I don't know. Couldn't quite work out what was going on there, if it was a kind of weird, Baudrillardian simulation of communism.
Yeah, it was extremely culture industry, that's for sure.
But that's fine.
Yeah, it was good. And we also ate some good pizza with vegetarian pepperonis.
Yeah. At a punk pizza place, so they're doing it right.
Also,
authentic political ideology.
Also pre-culture industry. Yeah, it was dope though. It was really good. My wife planned it all. It was an extremely good birthday.
Yeah, it was a good time.
Yeah.
So anyway, we haven't done an episode just the two of us in a long time, so we thought we'd do that, especially because we're in the same room. That's always a good time. And we didn't know what to do, so I dug out this book and I brought it here called Communism in the Bible by Jose Miranda, a really neat Mexican Catholic priest. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today instead of interviewing someone, because we've been really hitting it hard, I feel like, with the interviews lately.
Yeah, too many interviews. Too many good interviews that require us to do a lot of work. So this one,
yeah,
we just had to talk to each other.
Yep, no work involved, just play. Yeah, it's a great book. It's also great because we're always ripping on Jacques Ellul's Anarchy and Christianity, and this is like the communist version of Jacques Ellul's Anarchy and Christianity.
But it's good.
Yeah. It has some similar hang-ups, but I find it way easier to overlook them.
Yeah, I think so too. It's also a good comparison because they're both extremely short books.
Yeah, that's right.
Extremely short books with lots of exegesis.
Yep, both really biblically grounded attempts to make an argument for the synthesis of politics and Christianity.
Yeah, that's right. So all you evangelicals out there with friends who are like, but is it biblical Christianity? Give them this book, and they'll be like, it is.
They'll be like, actually, it might be the most biblical Christianity.
It's actually extremely biblical.
Yeah, I learned a lot, actually, about how biblical my communism was. I had no idea.
I didn't know it was so biblical, in fact.
Yeah, always good to find out the Bible agrees with you.
Yeah, for sure. So the book, Communism in the Bible, as you might guess, is about the ways that communism actually shows up in the Bible. So the main kind of thesis or gist behind the book is kind of a cool one. I think it's wrong, or a little bit wrong.
Yeah.
Anyways, the thesis
needs to be nuanced.
It is. Yeah, it needs to be way more nuanced. The thesis is this, that communism doesn't originate in Marx, but it is present in the Bible, and it's
traceable, or has an origin in Christianity.
Right. Specifically has an origin in Christianity. That's where the nuance is needed, because there were some proto-communists before
Yeah,
Acts.
For sure. And also, establishing an originary communist tradition in the Book of Acts is not super, I don't know. Those people aren't going to recognize what was happening in the Bolshevik Revolution. Just no doubt about that.
Yeah, exactly. It also like erases a lot of other like things that are happening in other places.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
it's like
exactly.
it's a nice point for recall for Christians, and it's a good rhetoric, but needs some nuance.
Yeah,
but let's give it to you.
We'll find some of it. Yeah, so the argument is basically the good part is that Christianity is communism. However you want to slice it, and maybe find some other like places that communism has shown up or getting more complicated throughout history. Like that's the gist that Miranda wants to establish, that Christianity doesn't just have a like relationship to communism; it is a communism. And he opens the book saying that if a Christian said to him that they were anti-Marxist, he'd be like, okay, we can have a conversation about that, but like that's fine. But that's a different thing than saying that you're anti-communist. And I think that's actually a good argument. It needs to be talked about some more for sure. But the point is basically there are more communisms than Marxism, and Christians should at least maybe start there, like thinking through how there might be a communism sort of indigenous to Christianity.
Yeah, I think that's good. That is like a pretty interesting thing to say. Not actually that radical of an idea. I mean, if okay, I mean the word communism denotes, like what's at the center of communism is the community. So like political arrangements that are about sort of like that, like community and commonality.
Yeah.
Right? That makes sense.
Easy enough.
Easy enough. But the one that the type of communism we find in the Church of Acts is, I think, similar in a lot of ways to like sort of like the Marxist philosophy of communism. But different in a lot of other ways too. There's a strong connection between those two things, but the point of the whole thing is that communism is larger than Marxism, but the type of communism you see in the Church of Acts is kind of similar to Marxism in some ways.
Yeah, and I think you could say something like communism is bigger than Marxism, but the communism that Christianity has should naturally make you talk to Marxists. I think that's Miranda's subpoint. Like, he is a Marxist. It's just that in this book, he's trying to make an argumentative appeal that maybe eases Christians into that a little more softly.
Right. It's definitely a book full of rhetoric that should like maybe persuade you yourself to think about Marxism in a little bit of a different light. But it's also one of those books that's really good at building that like left Christian dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
So nothing else, even if you'd find yourself not a Marxist, it's a good book because it will make you a little bit more aware of some of those things going on between Marxism and Christianity.
Yeah, I think too, it's worth kind of saying a little bit more about how communism is bigger than Marxism maybe for a minute before we don't jump into the Miranda stuff. Because like, it's true. There were communists before Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. They were part of a communist party.
Yeah, exactly.
So we have come to identify Marxism and communism, I think, for a lot of good reasons. Like, Marxism happened to be one of the ways that communism actually got kind of realized in a lot of parts of the world. And many of the non-Marxist forms of communism didn't, for a lot of different reasons. But at the end of the day, like, there's a lot to be said about what happened before Marx, what was happening around Marx, and maybe especially what was happening with Christianity and communism. So we've done a little bit of that work already with like the Win Stanley stuff and the Thomas Munzer stuff, but there's loads of others. Matt, I know you're into like the Situationists. They've got some things to say about that.
Yeah, yeah, the Situationists, I mean, okay, it's hard to kind of identify them as a cohesive group all the time because the Situationists like always wanted to sort of resist that fixity, like they weren't a party.
Right.
You can't be a Situationist now.
Yeah,
you can
what is that, by the way, for people who don't know what a situation is at all?
The Situationists were like a group of weirdos in France that were active between like the mid-50s and then like late 60s. There were a lot of folks involved, like filmmakers and artists and philosophers and all kinds of people. The two kind of primary Situationist folks that people know most about are Guy Debord and Raoul Vaneigem. Guy Debord is like the more communist, or I guess like at least the more Marxist one, and Vaneigem is like the one that's really an anarchist. I mean, maybe that's overstating it even. Like, Debord has a really complicated relationship with Marx. There's a great critique that he gives of Marx in the book The Society of Spectacle, which is like a big deal. Anyways, the Situationists, they were like kind of like a political group. That's, I guess, one way to put it. They were like a really early moment in leftist politics and postmodernism, and like the idea was that like all of society was being sort of replaced by like the spectacle of society, which is really complicated. Go read Society of the Spectacle. It's a really good book. Anyways, so they decide like the way that you have to be political is like trying to find ways to disrupt the spectacle of society, and they did that through like pranks and subversive films,
Board games.
stealing art, all kinds of good stuff. Anyways, long story short, one of them is a guy named Raoul Vanaim. Raoul Vanaim is a really cool anarchist thinker. He is not a fan of Christianity at all, but he is a really big fan of like a really heretical sect of Christianity called Brethren of the Free Spirit, and basically they were like a really like type of lawless Christians in Germany who thought like who took the idea of like the idea of like the sort of Christian communism really seriously, and that like if God provides grace to everybody, then you can't really commit a sin if you're a Christian. So they like stole things from rich people and did whatever.
Yeah, and there's loads of those examples too in the history of Christianity.
Yeah.
Some more heretical and some more orthodox. But I mean, there's a big case to be made that there's all kinds of resources waiting to be mined, and in many cases have already been mined by Marxists.
If that's the thing you're interested in, Raoul Vanaim has a book that's just called Brethren of the Free Spirit, and it's like a history of like what they were all about. It is kind of a bummer though, because in the introduction he's like, listen, this isn't supposed to be a political book. And it's like, shut up, yeah, it is.
Yeah. There's also a bunch of free books from him on like the Anarchist Library website and stuff like that.
Yeah, you can find them everywhere.
Yeah. Whatever.
But like, anyways, that's a really good investigation of like where someone from the left is kind of investigating the ways Christian communism looked in the world at a certain time, right? Like during medieval culture.
Right. And then, of course, like we said in the other two episodes I was mentioning earlier, like Engels and Marx both looked to people like Munzer and Winstanley and others to kind of get inspiration, even though they tried to separate them from their Christianity. I mean, they were wrong about that, and that's fine. We can say that. But, like, there's a continuity there and a really interesting thread. So, all that to say, I think Miranda's actually right to say that, like, if you said you're an anti-Marxist, it's actually important that you say that doesn't mean you're an anti-communist.
Yeah. Yeah. A little bit of a different, like, I mean, there's something going on in that rhetoric that doesn't quite translate to today, but you get the point.
And even, like, I mean, there are lots of anarchists today who would say that they're not Marxists, but they are communists, right?
That's true. Good for them.
Yeah.
I know this is kind of besides the point, but I think it is really troubling to me. Like, the brand of communism is sort of, like, not looking so good. Like, people are really quick to say that they're socialists or they're Marxists even, but people rarely say that they're just a communist.
Yeah, no, that's right.
I think that's stupid.
Yeah.
Being communist is awesome.
Yeah, it's really good.
It just
In fact, as Miranda says, if you're a Christian, you are a communist. And if you're not a communist, you're not a Christian.
Oh, sick.
So that's a good way to get into this, maybe. Reviving the brand of communism by looking at the Bible.
Yeah.
All right, so let's do it. So Miranda gives I think a pretty good argument for why communism was a necessary part of early Christianity, and we can talk about that. But he also structures the book with kind of an imaginary conversation partner. So there's like a secret capitalist Christian theologian, and they're always saying dumb stuff. And Miranda's like, here's what someone would say, and here's why that would be a bad idea.
Yeah, and the dumb stuff too doesn't come across as like too strawmanish either.
Actually.
I think that the things that he raises are things I see people say all the time online.
And he like allows them to have the premise assumed, even though he like shoots it right down.
Yeah.
But he gives it a minute.
It's a good tactic though, sort of employing an imaginary conversation partner.
So like maybe we should say the basic thrust of the argument is not very hard to get. Mm-hmm. The basic thrust is that Luke in the book of Acts, that's where he roots it all in Acts 2 and Acts 4, and he says, hey, a lot of theologians do a lot of work to say that these kinds of experiments in community living were not necessary, or they were optional, or they were extremely local, or not prescriptive or normative or whatever. But he thinks that there's actually a lot of good exegetical reason to think that the original Greek text or whatever is saying, no, that's not the case. In fact, it is really obvious that, like, you had to be a communist if you wanted to be part of early Christianity. And then he works backwards from that premise to make some arguments about Jesus' ministry and the prophetic tradition of the Bible and all that kind of stuff. But it all sort of orbits around those two passages in Acts. Does that seem like a good summary, maybe?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So one of the kind of one of the best like rebuttals he does, I think, this is a good way of getting into it, of like people who don't agree with that obviously, is he says like even if someone says that communism was optional for early Christians, which is like how some theologians present an anti-communist case, right? Like, yeah, of course they were, I guess, kind of communists, but that was just an option. Miranda says that means communism was still a positive option, and it shouldn't make any sense for Christians to like oppose it on principle since it's so obviously there. So here's a good like quote that I think also gives an example of the rhetoric that he's using. So he writes, "Let us suppose that according to Luke, communism was optional. I answer, but you combat it as if it were evil. According to yourselves, the Bible merely recommends it, so you prohibit it. Optional ought to mean that we Christians may opt for it. Nevertheless, you persecute as seditious and criminal and anti-Christian whoever opts for communism." So it's great because that's kind of his rhetorical strategy. Like, he calls the kind of argumentative bluff on a lot of these anti-communist arguments, and he's like, all right, even if you were right, which you're not, that's sort of the way he frames it, you would still be wrong ultimately, right? And I think that's actually kind of an unassailable point. Like, yeah, no matter how you look at it, clearly communism was an option for Christians, and you kind of have to figure out why you wouldn't opt for it. That's really the burden of proof, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we see exactly this kind of rhetorical strategy against, or sort of the anti-communist rhetorical strategy against communism all the time, especially when like center right and even like a lot of left-wing people talk about the Book of Acts and sort of like the role of the church or whatever. Like a few weeks ago, we asked, what was that guy's name? Pastor something. Anti-communist pastor. We asked him a question.
Oh yeah, no, I don't remember.
Yeah,
just anti-commie guy.
Anti-communist pastor.
Yeah, pastor bad guy.
Pastor bad guy. Pastor moneybags.
Yeah, he looks like the Monopoly guy.
Yeah, he has a monocle. It's weird. Anyways, that was basically his strategy too. It was like, well, you know, like it's true that the Church Next did this, but not very many. It didn't like work out, and obviously, like no one does it anymore.
Yeah,
but it's like it clearly was an option. So like why not? Like what's sort of the roadblock to it? And what like those questions get shut down really quick with it just like being like, well, no one does that, so
right,
who cares?
It's really ironic because you basically just end up being like, yeah, well, the early Christians were just dumb and wrong.
Yeah, basically it is.
Yeah.
It's like such a dismissive thing to not really consider that as a real option for what churches ought to look like or how Christians should operate in a community. To just kind of like brush it off with like, well, I don't know, it's over now.
Yeah.
It's like, you don't really care then, I guess.
Yeah, I think, too, I made the same point back then at that point, but, like, many pastors who will dismiss that as a non-normative option are, like, really quick to be like, but also women can't be pastors.
Yeah, exactly.
Because, like, the early church wasn't. So it's like, you know, we all pick and choose what we think is normative, but I think that Miranda actually makes pretty clear that this is a little more normative than many of the other practices.
Yeah, I think so. And it's, like, good to highlight that. Just because it clearly is such like an ideological point for people where they don't want to even like consider it or whatever.
Right. Yeah. So there's also, I think, maybe one kind of last like anecdote here that Miranda talks about with the Acts setting in particular is the Ananias episode. So yeah, Matt, can you recount that for me a little bit, because I am rusty on my biblical scene setting in my brain.
Yeah, so in Acts chapter 5, books 1 through 11. I don't know off the top of my head. I looked it up.
Chapter 5, books 1 through 11?
Oh my god. Acts chapter 5, verses 1 through 11.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, whatever, man. The pericope is entitled Ananias and Sapphira. It's like one of these really weird stories because something happens that I think is really hard for Christians to kind of deal with because it's sort of outside the norm of the way that they think like that God acts or like what God does. It's a story about Ananias, a rich person, and his wife Sapphira, who's also, I guess, a rich person. I don't know how that works.
By proxy.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they have separate bank accounts, who knows. But basically, they're trying to sort of join the Christian community. Peter tells them, like, sure, you can do that, but you have to give up your wealth. And then basically, like, what happens is Ananias is like, okay, I'll do that, and he doesn't. And then when he doesn't do that, the Holy Spirit, like, kills him, which is, like, I guess uncomfortable because, like, I don't know really how we deal with that or what we make of that. And here, I'll just actually I'll read the verse because it's pretty interesting. So he says, then Peter said, Ananias, how is it that Satan has so filled your heart that you have lied to the Holy Spirit and have kept for yourself some of the money you received for the land? Because he sold his land. Didn't it belong to you before it was sold? And after it was sold, wasn't the money at your disposal? What made you think of doing such a thing? You have not just lied to human beings, but to God. When Ananias heard this, he fell down and died, and great fear seized all who heard what had happened. Then some young men came forward, wrapped up his body, and carried him out and buried him. So this thing happens. Ananias is supposed to sell his property and give the money to the community, I guess. And he says he does it, but he didn't do it. So anyways, the point here, God kills him, I guess. I guess that's how we read that. It's kind of a crazy thing. So the question then becomes for Miranda is what's happening here? What is going on in this kind of pretty wacky story? It's not wacky. It's just miraculous or astounding or strange. All of those things probably. But basically the point is that he is supposed to be giving his money up to the community and kind of participating in the Christian communism that's happening, and he lies about it, and because of that God takes that very seriously. So it's kind of this really interesting thing in the Bible, and it's again hard and weird to deal with, but it tells you how seriously the early church thought about pooling one's resources with everyone else in the community.
So let me give you an example of how at least I've heard a couple of theologians in my life sidestep this issue, and then maybe you can tell me how Miranda solves it. So I've brought this up to a few folks, and then they usually say, yeah, well, he lied about selling all or giving all the money from the land to the common pool. So the sin is that he lied about it. The sin isn't really that he withheld some of it or anything like that. It's just that he said he was going to do something and he didn't, and that was the problem, right?
Right.
So I don't know, how does Miranda sort that out differently?
Yeah. Pretty explicitly, actually. So Miranda says about this Ananias sort of episode, he says, Peter does not tell Ananias that he could have come into the Christian community without renouncing the private ownership of his goods. Nor could he say such a thing after it was explicitly emphasized that of the Christians. Not a single one said anything was his. Ananias lied to the Holy Spirit by pretending to become a Christian via simulated renunciation. So it's the entryway into the community has a price.
Right.
And it's giving up sort of your wealth. And to pretend to do that is really, it's acting in bad faith. It's disingenuous. It's lying. That's true. But he didn't want to participate, right? And to say you want to while not is dishonest. But it just really demonstrates that this is a serious thing. It's not it's not just an option.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And also it's only an option insofar as you can either be into it or out of it.
Yeah.
Right. And Miranda makes that clear too, that Ananias could have just not been a Christian if he wanted to.
Yeah.
But he wanted to, so that means you have to.
But just a little bit.
Yeah, right.
I don't know. It's wild.
It is. Yeah, so I think it's important for people to read the rest of Miranda's arguments and kind of fill out the picture. I mean, the thing we can summarize, I guess, that we keep coming back to is that Christianity just is communism. There's no, it's not like communism. It doesn't have a relationship to communism. It just is one. And Miranda thinks there's all kinds of reasons that got off the rails, and he tries to give some of them, etc. But that's what he's trying to say. I think there's a couple points that we can kind of bring out about that as well. So we can talk about his view of Jesus in just a second, but it might be good to bring this back to the Rosa Luxemburg stuff that we did a while back as well. So in her essay, Socialism in the Churches, Rosa Luxemburg makes this argument that the early Christians were communists too, but she says she creates this really good distinction about how she calls them communists of consumption rather than communists of production. And so basically you sell all your stuff and then everybody consumes all that stuff together, so it's not individual consumption. But you don't end up keeping the things that were productive and then making those communally owned. And she thinks that's kind of a problem.
Yeah.
And at that time, we agreed that was a problem.
Yeah.
So that's really good, I think. And I think what's interesting is that Miranda is a little bit maybe intentionally confusing, but in any case, confusing about what he thinks that communism actually is. I mean, he seems to assume that if you wanted to be a communist today, you should probably do it in a Marxist way. and he talks about owning like the means of production collectively and all that stuff. So he clearly is trying to get people to follow that communism of production bit. But what do you think about maybe creating some distance between what Miranda's doing and what Luxemburg identifies in the early church?
I mean, I think that well, I think that we can see them. I mean, as really similar projects with, I think, some similar ends in mind. But they're two different types of analyses, right? Like, Miranda's analysis is not one that's like material. It's like a textual analysis of the early church and sort of like an exegesis, and that's fine. And like, but Luxemburg is thinking more through the historical conditions that are kind of in place there. So I think that Miranda's good and Luxemburg is good, but I feel like Miranda needs a little dose of Luxemburg.
Yeah, I agree. Because, like, it's good to say that Christianity is communism, but it's also good to say why that communism got maybe supplanted by, like, Marxist communism, for example.
Yeah.
Like, there's a reason, and it's not just because of ideology.
Right. It's because, like, the analysis is good.
Yeah. And because if you have just a communism of consumption, eventually you're going to run out of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. You need the means of production.
Yeah. Which Miranda seems to agree with, but like doesn't identify the problem.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think that's right. He wouldn't disagree, probably.
Yeah.
Just something that's like, again, I think because of the type of analysis of the text he's doing, it's just like not sort of in his vision.
Right. Yeah, it's almost like you could actually probably help him prove some of his points even by drawing the Luxemburg stuff.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. The danger, I guess, would be giving some ammunition to reactionary theologians, but...
Yeah, what ammunition do you think you'd give them?
Well, I mean, they might be like, yeah, well, the early church advocated a communism of consumption, but not production, right? Like,
oh, yeah.
And you'd get that argument with, I think, two kind of factions. One is the sort of intentional community movement, right, where everyone is sharing their consumptive means.
Yeah.
That's fine. And the other is a kind of more conservative, but somewhat, like... it takes itself to be a radical Christianity where it's like building a society in the shell of the old, right?
Well, I mean, that's, yeah, like the Benedict option for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So you're kind of just waiting it out, like waiting out till the eschaton comes and God judges everything and like you're safe, right?
Yeah. And I think recognizing too that the communism that is Christianity in Miranda's case is one that is like good for Christians but not sufficient for everybody.
Right.
Right? Because like if you just take Miranda's like, oh, Christianity is communism, there is kind of like a Christian supremacist kind of feel to that.
And he kind of makes those points too, even in the book. Like, there's a couple lines where he says something to the effect of like, Christians should be into communism because it's Christianity that's going to help you be a good communist. You know?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, no.
Yeah, not always.
Yeah, clearly. So maybe we can kind of start working backwards a little bit to some of the other arguments he makes. He has a long exegesis of like the biblical prophets. I feel like that's kind of straightforward.
Yeah.
I don't know. Don't really need to cover that terrain. They like justice. Surprise.
Mm-hmm.
You already knew that. But the stuff he says about Jesus is really kind of interesting, I think.
I think so.
So in the first chapter, he talks about how Marx says that the early Christians failed because they weren't political. And it's kind of a Luxemburg point there too, right? That like they didn't build a movement,
right,
despite being cool.
Yeah.
And Miranda wants to make the case that Jesus actually was political and was trying to lead a kind of people's movement, even though it looked different than you might suspect. Right. So did anything really like jump out at you in that picture of like Jesus as a political figure?
Yeah, I think what comes across is that like is a thing that like the new monastic kind of people are really good at pointing out all the time, that like Jesus is sort of like political in the way that you're not always expecting him to be political, right? He's like sort of a countercultural figure, and I think that actually works really well with identifying him like as a person of a movement, but not like a movement that's trying to like he's not trying to become like a new emperor or something like that, right?
Yeah.
There's like something different going on, and I think that works. I think the way that Miranda talks about Jesus is really similar to the way that Huey P. Newton talks about him in like the essay called The Son of Man?
Yeah, that's right. I think that comes from the Revolutionary Suicide.
That's right. Yeah, it does. Yeah. Well, it's similar in the sense that like in both Jesus is like the leader of sort of a popular front or whatever. Again, I think it's a little bit different type of popular front than like maybe the Black Panthers was. It has like a different logic because it's like a way different like situation.
Right.
It is like a really counterintuitive kind of political logic, but I think it is one. I think that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, if Christians weren't really political, then like maybe they probably wouldn't have gotten killed so much.
Yeah.
But so I think that's a helpful point.
Yeah.
Christians actually were political, and that's not the reason that a Christian communism sort of fell to the wayside.
Yeah, I think too this is a really useful book in an American context, at least in my experience, because so many people I know who are into cool Christianity, like genuinely good versions of it or whatever, are like really good about saying, no, Jesus was political, right? He had political stances, political activities, behaviors, all that kind of stuff. So you don't want to have like an apolitical Jesus. That's really good. And a lot of those people draw off of people like John Howard Yoder and also Jacques Ellul. But both of those figures make the case that Jesus is political in his nonviolence or in his pacifism.
Yeah.
And so he's trying to show you a different way of being political altogether.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's cool about Miranda is he's actually like, actually Jesus is political in the same way that a lot of people are political. The specialty, I guess, or the uniqueness of Jesus's politics is like that all lies in the kind of communist thrust of it. Like the kingdom of God that he has envisioned is different than what other political figures are thinking about.
Yeah.
So whereas, for example, like somebody like Shane Claiborne or something would want to be like, well, Jesus wasn't a zealot, right? Like, well, Miranda would be like, yeah, exactly. He was a communist. I think that's like a really good and helpful point. It's like a different political Jesus.
It is a different political Jesus. It's also, man, because the other sort of rhetorical strategy that folks in like the new monastic movement that like they employ is like, well, Jesus is a political figure, but he's like bigger than being a Republican or Democrat.
Yeah.
And like saying that is fine because like what you're trying to do, I mean, like that statement, like rhetorically, is trying to work through is like, well, people of all sort of different political affiliations can be Christians and like that kind of thing. But if it just like rings so hollow when you read this kind of stuff, it's like, well, he is bigger than like a Democrat or Republican, but for different reasons than what you think.
Right.
It just gives like a little bit more of an interesting take on that. I guess like the inclusive political Jesus to me feels wrong. Like, not that like people who are Republicans or Democrats like aren't authentically Christians. I think that they are, even though like they'll probably run into some problems. It's just that like there is something explicitly political about the nature of like Jesus and like the kind of work that Jesus did and the church did, and like to say that like, well, you can be a Democrat and a Republican and be a completely faithful Christian is rough because like you can't because like you're actually at odds with so many of these things.
Yeah, totally. Or at least, I mean, I think like the Shane Claiborne brand, for example, of neo-monasticism would be like, he's trying to say, well, maybe you can't be a Democrat or a Republican and be faithful to Jesus. Like that's the bigger part, I think.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like the direction that you move to exit that binary or whatever makes all the difference.
Right, and Shane Claiborne's exit that binary is like a real flaccid kind of politics that like the way that the people at the Simple Way do it is like cool. Like I don't have any problem with that, but it's also not like going to actually like it's a you know, does capitalism care if you live in a house with your friends? Yeah,
exactly. And I mean, okay, this is a Shane Claiborne respectful zone. I mean, whatever. He's a good person.
Yeah, sure.
I don't want to sound like I'm like bashing him, but I'm not bashing him, I promise. But I do think that he is naive, and I think naive about what it means to be political.
Yeah,
and what it means to say that Jesus is political. And that naiveness isn't the kind of naiveness that you would celebrate. Like, I think if you were like, hey, Shane Claiborne, I think you're naive, he'd probably be like, you're right. Like, I just believe what Jesus teaches.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like, well, no, like, I think that Miranda is trying to suggest actually Jesus teaches something a little more like definitive than that.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, maybe we could talk about how Miranda reads Jesus, because he actually takes pacifists to task, I think.
Yeah, a ton.
Yeah, in a way that like sometimes I read it and I'm also just like, oh, I don't know about that dude. Like you're a really good exegete, but like I've never heard that before.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah.
A lot going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, he has a whole chapter at the end about Jesus and violence. He spends a lot of time talking about turning the other cheek and like why you shouldn't say that to people who are like oppressed. I like that a lot, actually.
Yeah, me too.
Well, maybe to get the conversation going, I'll read a quote.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's like the strong point that he makes. There's a lot of exegetical arguments, and again, I don't feel like we are always very good at those.
Yeah, well, people like complain that we don't have enough exegesis on
But
the
like
show.
we're not good at it.
Yeah, exactly. Stick to what you know.
I don't know. Sorry.
Let Miranda tell you.
Yeah. Well, I guess so. Well, anyways, Miranda says this: "It is criminal to defend repression by the procedure of quoting to the oppressed the verse about turning the other cheek. The supporters of official theology will have to be punished for discouraging the struggle against injustice with this verse. By the grace of God, I will practice the heroism of presenting the other cheek when I myself have been struck on the first. But this is a personal and individual matter. What Jesus never said is, if they strike your neighbor on one cheek, turn your neighbor's other cheek. And the proletariat are defending the bread of their wives and children and the lives of all their comrades." So the idea here is, like, I think a pretty good one, and actually, I think a rhetorically helpful and theologically interesting kind of take on this, that, like, you yourself, in the face of oppression and repression and violence, you're allowed to turn the other cheek. But you can't turn someone else's cheek for them, or you can't prescribe that turning of the other cheek. And that's an interesting idea.
Yeah, I think so.
You wouldn't want to, you don't want to turn the cheek of someone else who's, like, really suffering.
Right. I think, too, that last bit where he says the proletariat are defending the bread of their families. I mean, machismo aside, that part's bad.
Right.
The point that he's trying to make, I think, stands in spite of that. Like, the proletariat are trying to defend people who are being oppressed, right? So it's like, it's nice to kind of come off of the you can't turn someone else's cheek, and also these people are working really hard to make a world where, like, people don't get struck.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The point about the sort of machismo is good.
Yeah.
I know some very good Soviet snipers that might like to have a word with them.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, I mean, there's a lot of other stuff in his picture of Jesus that's really important. I mean, unsurprisingly, he really picks up on the cleansing of the temple and says that Jesus clearly endorses violence in that case, which is true. Like, I don't know how else to get around that.
I mean, it is, but it's a hard sell.
Yeah, it's a hard sell, but only because I think you're working on the weight of anti-communist readings of that text.
Sure.
But if you read the text at face value, even in English translation, like, you have to work really hard to say that he wasn't whipping people out of a temple.
Dude, but people do work hard.
I know they do.
Well,
for sure.
the whip is actually more of like he found like a stick on the ground.
Yeah, he was just prodding people away.
He was shooing them like like a person with a broom.
Yeah. The other irony of that is like, okay, so maybe you could try to find a way out of saying he didn't whip human beings or something. I think that's probably wrong, but still, maybe you could. Even still, he's still, like, flipping over tables and destroying private property.
Of like business people.
Yeah, exactly.
of the petite bourgeoisie.
Yeah. Small business centers in the temple.
Oh my gosh.
Wow. Jesus is more radical than
Like, I'm just trying to sell my farmer's market goods here.
That's right. Farm to table, farm to temple. Yeah, so I don't know, like, he does some other, like, really intricate exegetical analyses. Like, he talks about some stuff that Jesus quotes from the Old Testament or from the Hebrew Bible. And, like, he's like, yeah, the stuff that Jesus is quoting, you have to look at that in context. And a lot of it has to do with, like, the community's right to punish other people and in some cases do violence against them. And Jesus doesn't seem to have a problem with, like, quoting that in context or whatever. And I'll leave that to other, like, biblical scholars to hash out. But I think that these 2 points especially, I mean, the temple one and the turning the cheek point are, like, really good reminders or troubling moments for other folks, pacifist folks.
Yeah, I think so. It is, I mean, some of it's hard. I think some of it's hard for me just because I kind of came to be an adult kind of thinking through a lot of, like, the pacifist stuff about Jesus. So I still probably have, like, negative reactions, but I don't disagree. I think it's right to, like, recognize that there's something, I don't know, something violent happening.
Yeah.
Something that I think is unavoidably, like, you can't not describe it as violence, right?
Right.
Like the people who, okay, I mean, like, you can probably even compare those things with, like, anarchist direct action or something. I think they are, like, really sort of similar. People, like, are mad about the presence of businesses in a place where they ought not be, right? And you go in and you, like, destroy them, and really nice liberal people get mad about it right now, and, like, they'd probably get mad about it then too.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I think it's cool too to bring this back to somebody like Galul,
Yeah.
Because so many items in this book and Elul's book, which were written like around the same time, now that I think about it, because this book came out in 81. I forget when Elul's book came out, but it was early 80s.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, quick Google. We'll come back to that. I feel like it's interesting to put them right alongside each other because so many of the points are like almost like direct responses to each other. So like they both have a reading of the Jesus and Caesar stuff. They both have a reading of Mammon. They both have a reading of like Old Testament texts. They both have a reading of Jesus as a figure or whatever. So I think that helps a lot to like just keep them troubling each other in a certain way.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Miranda's book is actually a really good thing to read like after you read Anarchy and Christianity.
I agree.
Like so many of the questions and so many of the takes that Elul has are kind of answered.
Yeah. And also, Miranda is not as nervous about working with actual communists.
Yeah, he's not a go up to the hill with your cows and like sit there by yourself kind of person.
Yeah, exactly.
It's good.
It's really good.
Anarchy and Christianity was written in 1991.
19 what?
1991.
91?
Yeah, man.
No, that can't be right.
Oh, that's the copyright date.
Yeah.
Dang. 1988.
Okay.
That was the year I was born.
Oh, congrats. You're as old as Anarchy and Christianity.
Happy birthday. That was 30 years
ago.
ago.
Yeah. Yeah, so, I don't know. This one came first, but you should read it after, I guess. I don't know.
Or you could just skip that one altogether and just read this one.
Yeah, so that's another thing, too, in this Jesus and Violence chapter is one of the ways that he sets up why you would want to recapture this, I guess, like the violent side of Jesus, is specifically because he's like, capitalism isn't just going to let you take its stuff.
Yeah.
And that might mean you have to be violent. And he says that's why Christians kind of have to think through this problem, right? And think through a justification for it that doesn't sound disingenuous or opportunist or anything like that. And I think that's really good because, as we talked about before, I think Elul's really naive about, like, the capitalist society that he's so upset about.
Right.
Like, capitalism doesn't care about your cows.
No.
But also, like, if it did start to care about your cows, you would have to think about what to do. And if you want to get martyred for your cows, that's fine. But, like, you can't turn your neighbor's cheek.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I think it's a challenge.
Yeah, it is.
For the church in general and for me, myself.
Yeah, I'd like to know more about Miranda. We were Googling a bit before, and it's actually kind of hard to find a lot of really good information in English. So I don't know if you read Spanish and you know more about that, let us know. But I couldn't figure out if he was part of any like Marxist movement in Mexico or anything. He's clearly a scholar of Marxism. I saw he has like a degree in mathematics, a degree in economics, a degree in theology. So he's like clearly a committed Marxist.
Yeah.
But yeah, if that meant like being part of a party or movement or something is not clear.
Yeah, the Wikipedia page did say there was kind of like a funny anecdote that was like he he had a degree in economics and he was like he was in Mexico trying to like give direction to business people, but then was like too sympathetic to the workers, so they like made him leave.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and that's when he did the biblical study, and then he started working on Marx and the Bible.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. It's like, man, is that guy a communist? He's making problems. Well, better send him off to school somewhere.
Yeah, yeah, common strategy.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. Make sure they're trapped in academia for so long that they like won't actually cause any problems.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, put them to work on like a really dumb, intricate exegetical problems.
Yeah. Academia is like a really big escape room.
Yeah,
and it's like it's the most challenging escape room, and you'll never get out of it.
And it's not team building at all.
Yeah, yeah, it's just like you by yourself.
Capitalism's really the ultimate escape room.
Ooh,
that's what we're in.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I know how to get out.
How?
A big mass movement against capitalism.
That sounds right. The team building exercise you need
is join the party. Yeah.
You gotta go to paintball.
Yeah. Dang. How much easier would it be to get people to join your party if it was just like, all right, we're gonna paintball.
We paintball every weekend, and that's just part of it.
Yeah.
We read Marx after.
Communist paintball followed by Marx, and then at night, communist D&D.
That's right. Bring them to your church.
Oh yeah.
Did you ever play Airsoft in church?
Yes.
Me too.
Like, it wasn't like an officially church-sponsored thing.
Ours was a youth pastor-led
oh my
Airsoft
gosh.
match.
No, that's on brand for youth pastors.
Yeah.
We just played, like, after youth group.
Oh, yeah. Now I was, like, in the church and everything.
Yeah.
So, I mean, churches already train people to be reactionaries and violent for capitalism, so, you know.
Might as well do The opposite.
Yeah, the one that's in the Bible.
Yeah.
Okay, that's something. There's no capitalism in the Bible. I
Yeah.
just want to say that. I think it seems like a really obvious point, but it isn't for some reason. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we could say that, and I think it's true. I think it requires some clarification because there are people who think that there is capitalism in the Bible.
Yeah,
like,
of course.
for example, I was at like, okay, so when faculty interview at my institution, like when there's like a job opening in
Yeah.
like a department or whatever, they bring them in, they make them give like a guest lecture, and like people like drill them on whatever. And there's one guy that was interviewing for the business department, and he was like, well, I'm a pastor and I'm an economist, and let me tell you about these two things. So he's like talking about his work as an economist, and then someone's like, okay, like how's that work out with your Christianity? Like, what kind of difference does that make? He's like, well, I use all kinds of biblical stories to tell people about economics, and they're like, okay, which ones? I don't know. And it's like the one where is it the one where Jesus pays all of the people, all of the laborers, the same exact wage?
Yeah, the communist parable.
Is it that one?
Yeah.
Is it the one where Jesus tells the rich young ruler that he like to go away and like sell all his things? You should tell him that one.
Is it the one where Jesus like doesn't have enough food, so he just like makes it out of magic?
And then doesn't sell it to people?
Yeah, and they like pick up the extras left over. Is it the one where someone's like, "Can you serve God money?" He just says no.
No, it's the one where you're supposed to pay your taxes. Actually,
yeah, but then you get out of the fish's face.
Yeah. So there you go. There's no capitalism in the Bible.
There's not. I mean, I think too, it's also really important to be to keep coming back to that nuance about communism in the Bible, about production and consumption.
Yeah.
Because like, yeah, there is no communism in the Bible in a Marxist sense.
Yeah.
That's true because like the political economy was different. There wasn't a proletariat in ancient Rome. That's just not a thing. But there's a through line that you can draw between the primitive communism there and the communism we should have today.
So I think that we can kind of wrap up this conversation by referencing our patron saint, Karl Marx. So in the German ideology, I think he makes a really helpful kind of observation about what it is, what communism is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it really resonates with the kind of conversation that we've been having right now. So in the German ideology, Marx says that communism is not like a stable state. Like communism isn't like a form of government that you can just kind of employ, even though that's the way we talk about it most times. Like, oh, you like communism? Go to Venezuela, idiot. But that's not like the Marxist way to talk about communism. That's like the liberal media kind of way to talk about communism.
They're not even communists.
Yeah, exactly. Anyways, so Marx says that communism isn't a stable state, but it's like the entire historical narrative of moving sort of like forward and progressing against like class struggle. It's like it's like this entire thing. So like it. I mean, you could read that in a lot of different ways, I suppose. But communism is like the movement against the state of things, is I think the actual phrase he uses. And that's helpful in the sense that like communism doesn't always look exactly the same because it kind of emerges out of historical conditions and like that's the whole thing going on. So the communism in the Bible isn't a Marxist communism, and that's like not a problem because it wasn't available to those people. It wasn't available to Peter in the Bible and in the church and whatever. But it is available to us, and like maybe we can like at some point like the historical conditions will change so much that like Marx will just be a nice like sort of historical reading that we'll do in like a classics course in the future university. But like until then, like we're still kind of a part of that struggle against the state of things.
Yeah, that's a really good note. I think,
man.
To end on.
Well,
you did it.
That's because I'm really smart.
You are. Can't argue with that because I'm not really smart. Yeah. So anyway, not to take away from that brilliant ending, but this Miranda book's really good, and this is a free dissertation topic. I like to give those out. Read Miranda's book, read Jack Lula's book, and talk about why Miranda's book is better.
There you go.
Comparative analysis, but one is better.
Yeah, sick. That's a really good idea.
I know.
I wish I could send that to myself in the past.
Yeah. You wouldn't get any jobs, but you'd have a lot of fun work to do.
I mean, yeah. Thanks for listening to Magnificast. If you are interested in this conversation, then you should read Jose Miranda's book, Communism in the Bible.
They're not even paying us to promote it. He's dead.
Yeah, it's true. It's a Whiffenstock book, and I think it's pretty cheap.
I got it really cheap.
Just go check it out. It's on the internet. Also, if you like this podcast, you can give us money on Patreon. Patreon.com/themagnificast. You can find us on Twitter. You can find us on Facebook. You can join our cool Facebook group called the Magnificast Basement. Lots of good posts there. You can kind of like see other people who are in the community. Nice.
Yeah.
Just networking, you know?
Good friends.
Yeah.
Good comrades.
There you go.
Better friends. Better comrades. Podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. You can find us on 2 podcast networks. One is called Theology Corner, and the other one's called Critical Mediations, and they're good podcasts on all those places. Specifically, go check out Friendly Anarchism. Go check out Rev Left Radio.
Gods and Ghosts.
Gods and Ghosts.
Really good one.
So good, man.
Season of the Bitches on there.
Oh yeah, that's good too.
Yep.
My favorite episode of Gods and Ghosts is this one. Shoot, what's the name of the place?
I don't know. I don't know what your favorite one is. Diners and Dives.
Gods, Ghosts, Diners and Dives.
Yeah.
It's the one where Tyler Hill.
Tyler Hill and Guy Fieri go to a couple diners and a couple dives.
Yeah. That's my favorite one. Okay, go check it out. All right, as usual, all the music is from Mario Armstrong, and the outro music is from The Illogical Spoon. Check it out right now.
Happy birthday!
Hey!
To Matt.
To me.
And you, I guess,
if it's
you
your
share
birthday.
one. Yeah.
I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. Jackson, keep your hoods up. Keep your hoods up and you stay up late. In Jackson, you keep your hoods up.